Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started today. Welcome to the North Carolina Electric Transportation Stakeholder Webinar. Excited to be joined today by a number of great panelists and have a really inspiring conversation about economic development, electric transportation opportunities here in North Carolina. My name is Stan Cross, and it's my pleasure to serve as the Electric Transportation Policy Director for the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. The Southern Alliance for Clean Energy is a nonprofit based out of Knoxville, Tennessee that promotes responsible and equitable energy choices to ensure clean, safe, and healthy communities throughout the Southeast. SACE has been doing this work since the mid-'80s and are proud to be a part of the clean energy economy here in the region. So just to begin with, I want to give you a sense of today's program. After some housekeeping, we're going to jump into a presentation of the new North Carolina Electric Transportation Report that's going to be presented by Nick Nigro of Atlas Public Policy. Following Nick's presentation, we'll have a roundtable discussion with a fantastic group. And then we'll wrap up at 2:25 with some final words and close out by 2:30. Just some ground rules, just to let everyone know, participants will remain muted and videos off. If you have questions during either Nick's presentation or our roundtable discussion, please enter them in the chat function. My colleague Dory Larson will be curating those questions and we will put them to Nick or the panelists as time allows. If we're unable to get a question answered during the presentation or panel, we'll circle back up after the presentation the webinar is over and provide answers to any remaining questions. SACE is recording this event and will share pending presenter approval. So I hope you all enjoy today's presentation. And with that, we're going to go ahead and kick things off. So Nick, if you would like to share your screen and introduce yourself, we'll get rolling. Thank you.
Excellent, Stan. Thanks a lot for the invitation to be here. Hopefully I'm in presentation mode any second now.
Looks good.
Okay, hold on one second. All right, can you see the full slide now?
We can, yes.
Oh, excellent. All right. So thanks again for the invite, Stan. Always great to be connected with folks in North Carolina. So my name's Nick Nigro. I work at Atlas Public Policy. I've been working in the EV space for over 10 years now, kind of showing my grays here. And I've actually a personal connection to North Carolina from back in the beginning of EV days. One of former assistant city manager of Charlotte, or Raleigh, excuse me, a fellow named Julian Prosser was an early advocate for EVs in the state. And I had a bunch of opportunities to talk with him and visit with the folks in North Carolina as you guys were early leaders in the state. And so I'm really happy to be here to talk about how we can return North Carolina to that leadership position in EVs. So my company, Atlas Public Policy, we're based in Washington, D.C. We've been around for almost 6 years now. We are a mission-driven company focused on bringing data and analytical capacity to people who are working in public policy. We do a lot of work in the transportation electrification space and other climate-related issues. And we were very happy to partner with SACE on the report that I'm going to present to you today. One quick plug for those who are working in the EV space. We have a product called Evhub, which is a great resource for data and other policy and market developments. There's over 1,000 users on the platform. If you work at a public agency, you can get free access to it. So if you haven't joined, I encourage you to sign up. And if you have any questions about it, I'm happy to answer them offline. So before I get into the details of the brief, I think it's always helpful to provide a little context on where we're at in the national picture. And I would be remiss if I didn't start any presentation on how well electric transportation is doing if I didn't talk about batteries. Because really that's the story of transportation electrification and where we're at, what the products are being offered today and what will be offered in the near term. It's that incredible decline in the cost of manufacturing and producing batteries for these vehicles. You can see this chart from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Shows almost a 90% decline from 2010 to 2020. Back when I first started working in this space, the conversation was really about passenger vehicles and plug-in hybrids and how could we get people to charge whenever they were parking their car. And once Tesla came in and other companies came in to produce long-range battery electric vehicles at scale, we started to see considerable declines in the cost of batteries and also a broadening of the tent and the number of vehicles that became practical to electrify. So here we are going to be focusing a lot on medium heavy duty in the near term. I know we'll be talking about that during the panel. And it's really in large part due to this incredible progress in the decline in cost of batteries. At a very high level, passenger electric vehicle sales have been pretty flat for the last couple of years. Once the Tesla Model 3 was introduced, a lot of the sort of pent up demand for electric vehicles was kind of absorbed in the passenger vehicle space. You can see the chart here. It's a collection of sales by quarter organized by manufacturer. And those big blue spikes in 2018 was when that Model 3 hit the market. And since then, there haven't been as many new offerings for consumers to get into. And Tesla continues to, as you can tell, take up the lion's share of sales. But the good news is there's a considerable amount of new vehicle models that really do fit the needs and desires of the average American consumer that are coming this year and next year. Frankly, we were hoping they were becoming last year, but the pandemic really kind of put a pause on some of the new model introductions. Speaking of the pandemic, I'm sure many of you are curious how has EV sales fared because of the pandemic. And we just got our December sales figures in. This chart only shows you through November. And what we saw was basically December was a really great month for EVs. Somewhere near 45,000 vehicles, new vehicles were registered in the US. And that put the year over year sales down by fewer than 5% from 2019 levels, which is considerably better than where the conventional vehicle market is. And so that's a good momentum for us in seeing the sales being resilient for the passenger space, especially because there weren't a lot of new introductions of new models besides the Tesla Model Y last year. And so, at least from throughout the entire calendar year. So there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about where sales are going to be in 2021 for this technology. One of the major opportunities that we face as a country in electric transportation is attracting the investment that have been committed by manufacturers around the world. We track them very closely on Evhub. This chart here is just a summary of where company headquarters are that have made announcements for investments in electric transportation, and based on their announcements and other public statements, where we think that money is going. And you can see the United States is slated to get a good chunk of that money, currently around 20%. That's up from where we were just a year ago, where we were hovering around 15%. So in the US, we certainly have starting to see some momentum here. I will say that I think that since the election, we've seen an acceleration of those investment announcements, particularly in the United States. 2021 has been a very banner year so far for those new announcements. You can see them summarized here in the slide, from Ford refocusing their investments on electric transportation to GM making some commitments and aspirational commitments for the phasing out of gasoline vehicle sales in their passenger space and launching a new medium heavy duty commercial EV brand, and others, lots of charging companies going public, having very sky high valuations. We could talk about that if you want, but really what it's showing is that the market sees the future of transportation as electric. And for us, as anyone interested in policy, we really have to do more to increase the US share of that investment target, because it's what we've tracked is well over $400 billion of announced investments. And so that's a lot of jobs. It's a lot of intellectual property that could be created here in the US, manufacturing capacity, and really stepping up as a leader in climate. And so that's really the prize, if you will. And so we have a lot of work to do in the policy space if we're going to get more of those investments in the US. Speaking of policy, because of the election and some of the changes here in Washington, we can expect lots of activity for the first time in the last several years that will be positive towards electric transportation. In the executive side, we think there'll be improved standards for light, medium, and heavy duty vehicles, probably just a revisiting, frankly, of how the light duty standards or the medium and heavy duty standards are done. You may have seen commitments by the Biden administration on public fleet vehicle purchasing and trying to green the fleet, if you will. That's a considerable market opportunity when you look at how many vehicles are owned by the federal government, somewhere over 600,000. And then continued leadership or enabling of that leadership by the state of California. That will be expected from the executive branch. Congress is, as always, kind of a uncertainty. We're not sure exactly what's going to happen. Reforming of the federal EV tax credit is on the table. That's helped stagnate the sales a bit for Tesla and General Motors, as both of those companies had their sales hit their sales cap for the tax credit. So we don't think those leaders should be kind of penalized for being kind of first movers in EVs. So hopefully Congress will revisit that and get the tax credit back to those companies and provide some certainty into more of the middle of the decade on where it should go, where consumers can expect that tax credit to be. Similarly, there could be some activity in the space around economic stimulus. EV infrastructure is a big focus in that area. And so regardless of what happens on Capitol Hill and Washington, we expect the states to continue to push forward. We've had announcements of goals for 100% electrification in the state of California and the state of Massachusetts, and a recommendation by a state agency in New Jersey, and lots of activity in that space. And so we expect that kind of momentum to continue, and also a increasing focus on medium and heavy duty electrification. I'm sure we'll talk about it more during the panel, but we've got product that's going to start to hit the market here that's very compelling on a total cost of ownership basis. The numbers really do pencil out for a lot of these use cases, especially when you start to produce these vehicles at scale. And so it's a very exciting time for that segment of transportation. And I would expect states to follow suit and put in policy to encourage the adoption of those vehicles. We'll talk about it a little bit more later, but there's lots of funding too from the Volkswagen settlement and federal programs like the Federal Transit Administration's low emission, no emission program. So lots of activity in Washington. Just as a quick summary of what's happened because of the pandemic for everyone and how that's affected EVs. I mentioned earlier, sales are down fewer than 5% once you include December sales for EVs. So that's a very good sign relative to the overall market, which was down 15% year over year for passenger vehicles. The investment pronouncements on the EV side is up. There's considerable momentum in that front. Charging deployment is up. We've had considerable increase in fast charging deployment around the country. And that's an important part of making these vehicles successful in the marketplace. On the government side, we see lots of activity in Washington, as I just mentioned, and increased activity at the states. One caveat to that is just where the state government budgets are this year and next year. There are certainly going to be some tightening of the belts. And so certain states that have dedicated programs like Volkswagen settlement, other areas we can expect continued funding, also at the federal level for FTA, but other new programs might be harder given the constraints on state budgets. And I've already talked at length about the truck and bus momentum here, but there was really no slowdown, frankly, in where the truck and bus market was as a result of COVID. And so there's certainly a bright future in the near term for those technologies. Volkswagen settlement was kind of almost the organizing principle in some ways for electric transportation when states were given funds through the mitigation trust. And it's really helped build institutional capacity across the country to look at electric transportation technologies. EVs have done quite well so far with the funds that have been delivered. 50% or so of all Volkswagen funds were for electric transportation. But frankly, there's still a ton of money still left to be spent. Something near 70% of funds have not been awarded yet. And so stay tuned, because now that we've got medium heavy duty trucks that are starting to be able to be mass produced, I can see that share of the pie for electric transportation growing well above 50% as states look to where's the most effective use of those funds and how they can encourage transformational technology adoption in their markets. So we're here to talk about North Carolina, and right now it's a mixed bag from the sort of key metrics that we've been using to measure progress from a jobs, clean energy development standpoint and market standpoint. So in the case of passenger vehicles, there is no real manufacturing capacity in the state at the moment. So compared to some of the neighbors in North Carolina, that's not where the action is, if you will, for the state. On the sales front, while it's about 17th in the nation, that's lower when you factor or scale by per capita, and so that's more of kind of a mixed bag, I would say, for the state. Many of the models that are been purchased by Americans so far are not yet being deployed in North Carolina. That's one of the key challenges that states face, frankly, in the near term, is manufacturing capacity and where those vehicles are going to go. So the more attractive you're able to make your market, the more likely the automakers are going to be ensuring that some products get delivered to you. And so that's a key consideration when you're thinking about what state policy should look like, because for the next few years, we could imagine some amount of supply constraints from the automakers as they kind of ramp up production. On the infrastructure side, it's a very similar story to passenger vehicles on infrastructure deployment, as you can see there in the statistics. On utility investment, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a few moments. Duke's, and from the investor-owned utility side, Duke Energy's proposal was partially approved just recently. About a third of what they proposed to invest in EVs was approved by the commission. That amounts to about 1% of the total infrastructure investments by utilities across the country. It's hard to get your arms around how much a role utilities are playing in EVs right now, but it is considerable and growing, especially when you look at a market like California, where they are over and above leading in EV deployment. Somewhere over 800,000 EVs have been purchased just in California. The utilities are also a key partner in infrastructure, with over $1 billion of approved investments just in the state. And finally, government funding, similar percentage basis for government funding as it was for the utility investments. So more work I think you could do there in the state. One of the most exciting things, as I mentioned, about investment and attracting investment in EVs is what does it mean for manufacturing and jobs and local economies? And there's, as I mentioned, there's over $400 billion that's been announced, and the US is only scheduled to get 20% of that. One of the ways that we can make that those numbers increase, or our market share increase for those investments, is making the US a more attractive place to purchase and operate an EV. For the most part, you want to make the vehicles where you can sell them. It's expensive to ship vehicles overseas. And so there's a strong incentive for these automakers to base their vehicle manufacturing facilities near where they can sell the vehicles. And so in that way, North Carolina has an opportunity as the US tries to take on more policy leadership, or restore, frankly, some policy leadership at the national level. North Carolina can try to position itself as a place where the manufacturing side of that equation can be met. And I know we're going to be talking about later, as we have folks from a couple of these companies in the list here on the panel, but there are already opportunities in the state from either having staff or manufacturing capacity in the medium heavy duty space And I see that as a potential for growth in North Carolina. On a sales, passenger vehicle sales, I've already showed you the top level statistic. This is kind of the breakdown, and what you can see on a per quarter basis. It's a very similar pattern to the overall market. Again, it's not including December sales for 2020. We just got those in this morning. But you can see this picture looks quite similar to the overall national picture. When comparing amongst its neighbors, North Carolina is falling as a bit behind Florida and Georgia. Georgia, as you might know, is a kind of early leader in the EV adoption space. Florida has been kind of a late entrant to it, and they are increasing quickly as a leader. There's a lot of purchasing going on in passenger EVs in Florida, and so amongst its peers in the South, North Carolina is kind of in the middle of the pack, as you can see from the bullets here. On the infrastructure deployment side, it's a very similar picture. Same position in terms of charging station deployment and per capita deployment for charging stations for North Carolina compared to Florida, Georgia, and Alabama, Tennessee, and South Carolina. What you can see from this chart essentially is the cumulative DC fast charging ports over time. That's the blue line, and then the number of cumulative all electric vehicles per DC fast charging port, essentially giving you that sense of how much infrastructure is there per vehicle being deployed. And so there was clearly a lot more EVs per DC fast charging station in the 2013 timeframe, but that number has been declining as more of the infrastructure is being built out. And so we don't have a magic number yet for the number of EVs or number of fast chargers you need per EV, but looking to other states, this is an important metric to kind of track and monitor as the state tries to grow their EV market. So I mentioned the top line number for EV investments from the utility. Just recently, Duke was approved to invest $25 million in EV programs in North Carolina. This was about a third of what they had asked to do amongst the commission. And the investment's going to support about 40 DC fast chargers and 240 level 2 stations. They were allowed to do that kind of deployment along with a smaller version of the school bus program that they proposed. I think the school bus program is kind of one of the most interesting pilots that's being put in place out there, in part because the utility is looking to take advantage of the battery for the electric school bus in order to offer grid services and essentially increase the value proposition of the school bus to the owner of the school bus. And I think that's a really untapped resource right now. School buses are parked idly for a very long periods of time, including in some cases many months over the summertime. And so that's a really great opportunity for the utility to take advantage of that energy storage resource. In the commission's decision, they offered guidance for Duke for next steps. I have to say, from looking at this from a national perspective, we need a considerable more amount of policy support from the state and from the commission so that the utility can play a stronger and more supportive role across the EV infrastructure space, because at some point that's going to be a considerable barrier to hitting mainstream markets. You need a very strong utility partner in some form or fashion across the spectrum when it comes to electric transportation, particularly in the medium heavy duty fleet space. These electrifying a 1 or 2 vehicles in a truck depot is one thing, but electrifying an entire truck depot where you have hundreds of vehicles is a very different challenge, and you really need a strong utility role there in order to achieve success. Volkswagen settlement, I've mentioned this a few times. This is what it looks like in North Carolina. Most of the money, just like the rest of the nation, is unspent. So that's an opportunity, I think, for electric transportation, especially as more vehicles enter the market. You can't buy passenger vehicles with the Volkswagen money. You can deploy electric vehicle charging equipment for light duty, but most of the money here could go towards medium and heavy duty vehicles. And there's lots of opportunities there from the school bus side, the transit bus side, especially if you look at how other states are committing their funds. And so I hope that North Carolina will make some strong commitments or look deeper into what some of the other states are doing with their Volkswagen settlement funds to try to increase that electric vehicle share of the pie in the near term. Looking ahead, I think there's lots of places where North Carolina can step up and regain its footing as when it was an early leader in EVs. One step that was very positive was the adoption of the Truck and Bus MOU. This was 15 states basically said that we will commit to trying to electrify 100% of our bus and truck sales by 2050. That's a pretty far out timeline, frankly, and according to our data, most truck and bus sales could be electrified much sooner. 2030, 2035 timeframe would be reasonable, frankly, based on where the technology is going. But just being a part of that process is a great first step for the state. They have plans in place for ZEV goals. You can see 80,000 by 2025. The motor fleet ZEV plan, I took a look at that. I think that's a good step, but I think the state can go much further with looking at public fleet electrification. Atlas did a study for the state of Washington, and it is a very positive picture for public fleet electrification in this decade right now, based on where the sales are, total cost of ownership is today, but where it's going to be by middle to end of the decade. The states could look to electrify nearly all of their public vehicles by that point. We also would recommend the state consider looking into more collaborations across the region. There's a real opportunity there to have a regional coordination from either manufacturing or market development standpoint, and we think that would be advantageous to North Carolina. Virginia just recently passed a law looking into a vehicle rebate. That's one of the key ingredients right now still for success in the early days. I mentioned earlier, you got to make your market attractive to get the vehicles, assure that the vehicles will be made available for sale in your state, and putting some sort of vehicle incentive in place is one of the best ways to guarantee that. And finally, just focusing more on getting VW and utility investment into the state, I think is going to be important, and making sure more of that from the VW share is made electric is going to be critical. So I really appreciate your time and the opportunity. Happy to take questions. I'll be sticking around as the panel gets on. So if Stan or anyone has questions for me, I'm happy to jump back in.
Thanks a lot, Nick. Really appreciate those insights. Yeah, it's amazing to see, on one hand, how much North Carolina is tracking in many metrics with the country, and on others, how much opportunity we have.
Mm-hmm.
And one question I have, just to press a little further on it, is, I noticed that you, in your second to last slide, it was talking about needing to double annual EV sales in order to meet over 80s zero emission vehicle goals.
80K, yeah.
When you're looking around the country, how challenging is that type of growth pattern going to be over the next 5 years to reach those goals?
It's going to be really hard this year. COVID really, slowed things down a little bit, pushed out timelines for introduction of new vehicles. But what you've also seen is the impacts of the election on the plans for the vehicle manufacturers. You saw Ford doubling their electric vehicle commitment, I believe, investments in EVs, and GM trying to make an announcement every day, it seems like, in terms of showing their commitment to electric transportation. So that's the good side of where things are. You can see the pipeline is being filled up, if you will, for getting vehicles available. It's where those vehicles are going to be and the timing of that's a real question mark. And if you look at how much they're going to be able to put out in the next couple of years, they could be supply constrained as other states try to kind of become that leader themselves. They look to California, they look to Washington, New York, and others who are kind of more out in front and starting to trying to make themselves comparable to those states. It's going to be hard. So North Carolina, the sooner the better is the short answer. You know, putting some policy in place that makes it clear it's a welcome state for EVs, the better off they'll be.
Great, great. Well, thanks for that. And that's a great lead into our panel discussion. So Nick, thanks again for the presentation. We really appreciate it. And, yeah, glad you'll be sticking around. And so now what we'll do is we'll switch gears and we'll bring forward on the screen our panelists. Today we have a number of folks joining us for this roundtable discussion. Uchenna Bright will be joining us from E2. Jed Routhe will be joining us from Thomasville. Richard Colley from Arrival. Representative John Szoka from North Carolina General Assembly will be with us, as will Susan Fleetwood from North Carolina Commerce Department. So Kyle, I don't know if you turn their videos on or if our panelists would like to turn their videos on, go for it. Thank you. So on this, just to sort of, level set this panel discussion, our intention today is to, really let this be a discussion among, these, 5 folks who have volunteered their time today, who all come to this question of, how do we drive transportation electrification in North Carolina from a unique perspective? And then on this call today, in terms of participants, we have a range of electric transportation stakeholders from the industry, local government, state agencies, nonprofits, universities, clean cities coalitions, and more. So to kick off this roundtable discussion, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to introduce yourselves. I'll go ahead and call you by name and let you introduce yourselves, and then tell us what you believe are the significant economic development opportunities for the state that we as electric transportation stakeholders, should keep top of mind. So with that, Uchenna, if you would kick us off, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, Stan. You can hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. So thank you, Stan, and everyone. I'm so excited to be here, and just thanks for inviting me to participate. And as Stan said, my name is Uchenna Bright. I am the Eastern States Advocate at E2. E2 stands for Environmental Entrepreneurs, and as Eastern States Advocate, my work focuses on all the East Coast states from Maine to Georgia. And just a little background on E2 before I get to Stan's question. E2 is a national nonpartisan group of business leaders, investors, and other professionals who care about and advocate for policies that are good for the economy and good for the environment. And we have over 9,000 members and supporters who do business in every state in the country. And our members use their voices, which are business voices, to advocate for and make the economic case for smart climate and clean energy and overall environmental policies on the state and federal levels. So to get to Stan's question about the economic opportunity here and in North Carolina, I would say that the opportunity, just as you saw from Nick's presentation, is that there's so much room to grow. And when you look at North Carolina and the commitments that it's made, you can tell that the state is serious about capitalizing on those opportunities. And by opportunities, I really mean the opportunity for job growth, the opportunity for job creation, for better quality of life through greater mobility options, through better air quality, and more resilient and reliable infrastructure. And all these things contribute to stability and prosperity. And I think, just keeping in mind when thinking about transportation and economic development is that it's not just the car you drive, it's also about the infrastructure. It's about maintaining that infrastructure. It's about state and local fleets. It's about the clean energy produced right there in North Carolina that supplies those fleets and personal vehicles and all of the mobility options with that local clean energy charge instead of spending money on gas, which is just going to go out of the state. So it's about job jobs created through things like grid modernization or improving battery storage, so you can completely optimize that clean energy that you're producing and that you plan to produce in the future as more and more electric vehicles come onto the grid. So the possibilities are really endless, and we're just getting started across the country, but also in North Carolina, and there's just so much room to grow. And I would be really remiss if I didn't also mention that these opportunities need to be for all North Carolinians. And when you have this kind of change at this kind of scale, you're completely, in some ways, rewriting and reimagining the economy. If you just think about all the things that we just sort of talked about with Nick, and all the things that go into electrifying transportation on the grid, and incorporating those vehicles into the electric system. So this means that we're reimagining, rethinking a complete economy, and we have an opportunity to do it right, which means equal access to this opportunity for everybody, and then also equal access to the benefits that it provides.
Thank you, Uchenna. That was great. Really appreciate your insights. I'm going to ask now Jed Routhe if you'd come on and go ahead and introduce yourself and respond to the question as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jed Routhe from Thomas Bus, and so behind me is if you can see that picture, that's a trolley car drawing that Pearlie A. Thomas drew himself in the early part of the 1900s of a Thomas trolley car, which is interesting to me because it gets us all the way back around to electric, right? So this company started with electric trolley cars, and now we're into electric buses. And I guess I've got probably a more limited view than my co-panelists of what it would do for North Carolina, because I really just see it from a manufacturer standpoint, and it's still pretty broad, right? So we started in earnest producing our electric school bus, which we call Julie, last year, and we produced 50 of those units last year. That will have an exponential growth this year. We're seeing opportunities come from everywhere based on a lot of what Nick said, a lot of VW money out there, we just have even had people donate, talked about foundations donating buses. People are really intrigued by it. And so when we got in that business, we certainly had to invest internally in infrastructure in our plant, outside the plant for charging. That's going to happen throughout North Carolina. There are going to be fantastic opportunities in the finance area. If there's $3.5 billion nationwide spent on school buses, there's a model for that. You spend so much now, and then you spend a lot in fuel later. We're very quickly approaching the point where an EV school bus will pay for itself versus a diesel, but that money becomes front loaded. And there are going to be opportunities for companies to figure that out. How do we help people spend a little more now to save a lot more later? And I think that there are going to be all kinds of partnerships and all kinds of creativity in that area. And I think there are going to be opportunities for partnerships. So we're seeing this happen in a lot of different ways. We're seeing certainly utilities getting involved in the process, which we certainly have brand new partners for us. And then there's all kinds of thought about what comes down the line. Installing vehicle to grid systems and figuring out what you do with the equipment after the school bus is done with it. A battery in a truck or a bus is worth a lot when it can no longer run the truck or bus. Still tons of storage that can be used in other places. So I think the opportunities are out there in a lot of different businesses, not just vehicles, not just infrastructure, but for that creative person who can figure some things out. And it's really an exciting future. So I look forward to this panel today. Thanks.
Thank you, Jed. Appreciate it. And sticking with manufacturing, Richard, if I can turn it to you to introduce yourself and Arrival and respond.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this today. Richard Colley, I head our public policy regulatory affairs for Arrival in North America. So we are a new sort of company founded about 5 years ago in London. Now we're in the process of setting up our US operations. And we recently announced our US headquarters will be in Charlotte, North Carolina. So this will bring 150 our corporate jobs over the coming years. And then we also announced our first microfactory, which is just over the border in South Carolina, but we're currently in the process of identifying additional locations. So I just wanted to, as part of that headquarter announcement, we also signed an MOU with the City of Charlotte on all of those areas that both Uchenna and Jed have just mentioned, in terms of how do we help cities and fleets meet their electrification and net zero emission targets, but at the same time create a number of opportunities there. I think with North Carolina signing on to the 15-state MOU that Nick mentioned last year, I think this will really help to drive sort of the economic development opportunities throughout the state over the coming years. I think a key step to that is really now taking those MOUs and policies on trucks and buses and then turning these into some more defined targets over the coming years. Similar to having specific targets for transit, for trucks, and then ultimately for fleets. And this will really, I think, assist the state in not only meeting those targets in the MOU, but also to have a very structured approach. And so that funding and manufacturers like myself at Arrival and Thomas Built will be able to plan going forward. I just wanted to echo Uchenna's point as well around equity. Yeah, I think there's a big opportunity here that we need to make sure that these fundings and these programs are really targeted so that they benefit everybody throughout the state. And so making sure that funding programs that agency plans for electrification, make sure that these vehicles are deployed in the areas that most need them, setting up workforce programs throughout the state. Arrival, we're going to have a range of different jobs from sort of a high school diploma, assembly type role, all the way up to corporate functions, and then a number of programs to make sure that people can get the education and the opportunities that they need to progress through that world. And I think with the number of sort of historically Black colleges in North Carolina, there's a great opportunity to really build some programs here. There are probably some areas that we also need that I think North Carolina will be able to improve the economic development and really ensure that people are deploying vehicles here. One of those is around like franchise laws. And so North Carolina last year did sign the bill that allowed 6 sales locations, which is only right now targeted towards Tesla. And so to draw more manufacturers in, so Arrival, Rivians, the Lucids of the world, we really need to make sure that we have a smooth path to be able to sell, service, and deploy vehicles here. So yeah, I think North Carolina really has a great opportunity here to become essentially the new California and set up a range of different policies here that I think a broader set of the US can really then mirror as we start on this path of electrification.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate that. I love the new California reference. And but I think to your point with the replicability of what can be done, elsewhere in the region. And if I could turn it over to Susan now, and kind of from your perspective in the Commerce Department, if you could introduce yourself and kind of respond to what you've heard so far.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Stan. Yeah, my name is Susan Fleetwood. I'm the Executive Director of Economic Development with the North Carolina Department of Commerce. And so we do a lot of things at the department, from workforce to innovation to rural development. But the thing that I'm involved in mostly is working with the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina, which is kind of our sales and marketing arm, if you will, working to attract new companies to the state or help existing companies grow and expand. And I'll just throw out a few things that maybe we'll talk some more about when we get into the discussion more. But lots of reasons why it makes sense to pursue a lot of electric transportation solutions. But the thing at Commerce that we're most focused on is jobs. And that's encouraging companies to create jobs and making sure that the folks that we have in our state are qualified and can take those types of opportunities. And we're seeing a really growing business demand from companies to understand what North Carolina's policies and programs are as it relates to not just electric transportation, but climate policies in general. And it's important, I think, that we be able to, having those types of policies helps us in a competitive environment, because companies have choices where they might locate a new operation. We think that we are very well positioned to grow, especially in manufacturing, because of the strong manufacturing base that we have, because of the heavy duty truck and bus manufacturing that we do in our state, even though we don't have a vehicle manufacturer, and because of all the automotive parts manufacturing that we have already in the state. We think that positions us well. We also think we have a strong story to tell as it relates to talent. And one of the things that our department did was a clean transportation workforce assessment that was part of the governor's executive order 80. And so I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about that and how what that tells us about our workforce in the state for this growing part of the economy. And also that we have, in addition to the workforce, we think we have a lot of other really strong assets for companies to consider in addition to talent, but access to customers and suppliers, access to markets, sites that can accommodate large manufacturing operations, and other elements of our business climate, which make it very stable and competitive. And so that's what we're trying to do, is tell that story about how North Carolina can compete with other states to be a really successful place to do business.
Thank you, Susan. Appreciate that and appreciate all the work that you do. Representative Szoka, if you could round us out, introduce yourself, and give us your thoughts on what you've heard so far.
Sure, thanks a lot, Stan. I'm Representative John Szoka. I represent a district in Cumberland County, which is most famous for Fayetteville, Fort Bragg, and I'm a retired military officer, and I-95, which sees more than its fair share of traffic going north and south on a daily basis. I'm senior chairman of the House Finance Committee, which we deal with tax policy. And I'm a co-chairman with Representative Dean Arp from Union County of the House Energy and Public Utilities Committee. So I'm in this from all different angles. In the 2019-20 legislative session, I was the primary sponsor for a bill. It was House Bill 329, which defined how companies could actually build charging stations, because we have a regulated monopoly here in terms of power, primarily Duke and Dominion, the two big power providers, mainly Duke Dominion in the northeastern part of the state. And to become a power provider, you have to meet the regulatory criteria. Well, we had to make a slight tweak in the law, but very substantial tweak in the law that would allow anybody, if you want to build a charging station, that you could do it. And we used a thing called resale of electricity. Much like you pull into a marina or you take your RV to an RV park, you can plug in and the owner of that marina or RV park can charge you for the electricity. Up until that law passed, what we had here for charging stations was you're going to rent the space, or in a lot of cases, like here in Fayetteville, the city put in several recharging stations and they just gave the energy away for free, which that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So basically, I've heard a lot of things so far in the very good presentation that Nick provided. There's a couple things I'll take issue with, but basically I'm about free markets. I'm about allowing the markets to do what markets do best, is allocate resources. If consumer demands want electric vehicles, they'll go buy them. And I think that we've seen in the past few years, the demand for that has increased rather dramatically. From a governmental viewpoint, being a good steward of all of your tax dollars and everybody who can afford an EV, we have to be very careful about what we do in terms of incentives and policies, because it's the string coming out of the ball of twine. You pull on it one place and the ball of twine unravels somewhere else. So, Uchenna had mentioned equity, and Nick had mentioned Duke's investment. And I applaud Duke for doing that, but you have to understand that in our way of how energy rates are charged, they get to rate base that, which means that every person who is a Duke customer, every ratepayer, will be paying some fraction of that, whether they have an electric vehicle or not. So if you're talking equity and you allow utilities to build out the charging station, system throughout the state, then you have a lot of people who are not taking advantage of it, but they're paying for it. And that certainly is not equitable. At least I don't think it is. And Nick, you really did have a very good presentation. But you did hold up California, New York, and Washington as examples of great EV policy, but they have a lot of not so optimal policy in other ways. And if they didn't have suboptimal policy in their tax structure, you wouldn't see the flight of people from New York to Florida and California to Texas, which I like to believe that we're more like them in having a fair tax system that's structured to benefit all taxpayers, not just somebody. So when you talk about legislatively, it becomes very complex, very quickly. And hopefully I didn't sound like too much of a jerk saying this, because basically I'm in favor of EVs. I told Stan before this started online that if there's a certain major manufacturer who's coming out with this all steel pickup truck, if that would be at a price point where I could afford, I'd buy one today. But we in the legislature are looking for ways to free up the markets to help our current manufacturers. And it's not just by incentivizing EVs, it's by making sure that we keep electric rates as one of the lowest in the Southeast, which every manufacturer certainly appreciates, and every consumer, every ratepayer should appreciate, and making sure that our tax policy rewards companies who are here, who want to come here with a low cost tax structure.
Thanks, Representative Szoka. I appreciate you shining a light on the legislative complexities of moving this market forward. And so just to kind of kick us off now into a conversation, I want to kind of pull us for a moment towards what Susan was speaking about the Commerce Department's workforce assessment that was done as part of Executive Order 80, and really looking at how do we build out this clean energy economy. And based on what Jed was saying about all the different ways in which jobs can be created and innovation can happen through the entire ecosystem of electrification, and Richard's comment about Arrival coming to North Carolina, opening up a real wide range of jobs in terms of skill sets that Arrival is going to need to deliver their products. I'm curious, Susan, if you could kind of frame up for us what that assessment found, and if you can, kind of addressing what everyone said so far. What are some of the policies that the Department of Commerce is seeing as advantageous to maximize the workforce opportunity that the assessment's pointing to?
Yeah, I'll speak at a pretty high level about it. It goes into a lot of detail and a lot of specifics about specific occupations and specific industry sectors. They're challenged a little bit. They were challenged a little bit in this study because this is a burgeoning set of occupations and industries, and so there aren't the typical NAICS codes or SOC codes that they typically use to analyze these types of things. And so they found about 300,000 folks across the state that were working in clean economy industries, including clean transportation. That was one of the major sectors that they looked at. Not all those people were 100% involved in clean types of activities, but they have the types of skills that are needed to transition to a clean economy. And the good news, I think that what the assessment found was that we can currently meet the clean economy workforce needs, but we probably do need to be thinking ahead about transitioning workers because of the churn that is likely to happen as this transition comes. There will be some people who will need to transition their skill sets to a new type of manufacturing. And we think also that there is a really strong opportunity to grow that workforce, obviously, as we talked about, and the importance of really engaging with companies early in their need, understanding what those needs are, and making sure that it's a conversation of the workforce that's being developed is in response to those needs, not kind of guessing what we think those needs might be. And so the importance of engaging youth early in apprenticeship and those types of programs was really emphasized as part of that. So that's kind of a high level overview, and I'd have to probably dig through it for more specifics, but some other people may have already done that. So that's what I would share.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you know, if panelists want to respond, feel free to do so in real time. You don't have to wait for me to call on you if you have things that you want to respond to, and otherwise I will start calling on folks. But mostly, Richard and Jed, I'm curious, kind of from your all's perspective, manufacturing in the state, hearing what Susan just said, what are some of the sort of near-term opportunities and challenges you see regarding policy or workforce development? I know, Richard, you were beginning to speak to, you know, the challenge of not being able to, you know, direct sell with franchise laws and whatnot. Is that or other things on your mind that you'd like to bring to the table?
No, I think as Susan mentioned, one of the primary reasons why we are located in the southeast is because of the availability of a broad range of workforce, whether it's from the manufacturing side all the way up through our corporate roles. I think there needs to be it needs to start early. Like, we need to get sort of our children into STEM programs from high school all the way through college. And as we build up our operations in the region, we'll certainly be looking at some internship and some opportunities to have people come and work through our facilities. At Arrival, we have a slightly different approach to manufacturing to others, and so we have this concept called a microfactory, and so these are buildings that are about 200,000 square feet and are about 240 jobs for that building. So it's relatively modest in terms of other sort of large manufacturing hubs. And that's the size of our Rock Hill facility. But this is going to be, as we start to add in more advanced equipment and composites and other new technologies into these areas, again, we're going to work closely with local sort of workforce development and colleges to enable to have people to have that higher set of skills. So although it's a low number of total jobs, those jobs that we will be offering will start to increase the local average wage.
Yeah, from my side, I think I've been in this job 1 year now, and it's hard to overstate my ignorance of EV vehicles when I came in a year ago. And man, we're going to need, just from stem to stern, things are going to change. I mean, it is hard to find a diesel mechanic today for our dealerships, and now you're going to need those guys for a while, and you're also going to need master electricians to work on vehicles as well. A lot of training to be done. I mean, we're getting people certified up and down the chain, from folks that work in our factories to those who service our vehicles. And then on the product development side, the other thing that's hard to find in our business, even before this, was an electrical engineer. And now you need, a factor of those folks. And for us, software engineers were people we just didn't really need. And now you got to have them. I mean, this vehicle is as much a software platform as it is a vehicle. So tons of needs there. I mean, I think we should keep North Carolina State and NC&T and UNC Charlotte very busy in their engineering schools in Western Carolina in the coming years, because we're going to need those folks desperately.
Hey, Stan, if I could hop in here. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Representative Szoka.
No, I was going to say, if I can hop in here for a minute, one of the major strengths that North Carolina has in this training issue is our system of community colleges. I've been involved, the legislature gets involved very close with the Department of Commerce when they're trying to get major corporations to come here. I remember one in particular about 6 or 7 years ago. We're looking at a Boeing factory that ended up down in South Carolina to come here. One of the things on the table was, because they worked with such exotic materials that very few people knew how to do it, one of the things we put in the package was a $20 to $25 million funding to the community college to specifically teach the type of unique composite materials they use in building the wing assemblies for the Boeing aircraft. Now, we didn't end up getting that, but the fact of the matter is that we were there willing to fund it. that was an important piece of the package for them. They didn't come for other reasons, which we don't need to diagnose right now. But as we see the need for technicians and things, or as the system does, our system of community colleges is very quick on the uptake. And if there's something in your area that you don't have enough of, I'd say go talk to your local community college president and see if they can add some courses to help you get some workers.
Yeah, I would just add to all those things that have been said, that in addition to the types of skills that are necessary, the assessment found, and types of skills from people with high school education and a certification, all the way up to engineers. There's a very broad range of skill sets, but also there's the opportunity for those skill sets to be dispersed across the state. And so because of the assets of the community college system and the university and the existing manufacturing that we have in our state, the automotive industry that we currently have is from Murphy to Manio, essentially. Those opportunities exist across the state, and for us, that's really important because we see a lot of strong growth in the urban areas of our state, which is great and important, but we'd like to see those opportunities across the state as well. And so there are opportunities that exist across the state as well.
So just to kind of build on this and shift it a little bit, right? And I think this in some ways ties back to Representative Szoka's free market comment, in that, we're all excited to see the market begin to embrace electric transportation. And we're seeing signals of that. And we all recognize that there are policies and there's ways in which utilities can engage in order to accelerate, that uptake. And what a question that came through from participants is one kind of about the sort of intangible benefits of electrification and what they mean to the economy of North Carolina. And Uchenna, when you were bringing up the comment about equity, we recognize that frontline communities suffer first and worst from pollution here in North Carolina and across the country. And as we look to electrified transportation, we're not only looking at improving kind of the quality of transportation, but we're looking at dramatically reducing pollution and building energy security for North Carolina by being able to use a domestic resource to power our transportation. So I'm just curious what folks think about, or what folks want to speak to about those sort of intangible benefits of transportation electrification, how they themselves also help to build a stronger North Carolina.
Uchenna. I guess I'll jump in there. I'll be the brave one to jump in the water first on this. Like, nobody's in favor of pollution in any form. Nobody likes that. North Carolina, well before me, has made great strides in reducing air pollution. And at the time, 20 years ago, known water pollution. With the advent of mass spectrometers that can now detect particles per trillion, it's a whole new world. In my district, we're dealing with the Gen X pollution in groundwater from a local manufacturing facility. 20 years ago, nobody even knew that this particular substance was getting into groundwater because the test equipment just wasn't there. So when you talk about pollution, you have to be very careful, because someone can always point to a recent article and say, well, what this guy said was all crazy because look at Gen X, look at this, look at that. As technology advances in all fields, we find out more things that are out there that can help us, like EVs, and that can certainly hurt us, like these minute quantities of pollutants that nobody wants in their body or their kids or their crops or anything else. So it's extremely difficult to quantify that. I would just sum up and use one measure, perhaps, of the reduction in air pollution in North Carolina. When it was first introduced, the vehicle emissions tests were in all 100 counties. And because of the standards that have been reached, I don't remember the exact number, but I think there's only 30 some odd counties and if somebody on here knows the exact number, correct me, still have mandatory emissions tests because the air's been a lot cleaner in the last several years than it was when those were first put into place. So there is a place for policy, and there's a place for government mandates. That would certainly be one of it. Water quality is absolutely a place for state mandates in there. When you say about how much cleaner is it, somebody can probably throw a study up that shows it, but then there's another study that shows where all the things in batteries come from is in China, and they're using, essentially, in some cases, Uyghur slave labor in that one province in China to build it. So you have to be careful on how you decide to determine if something is more beneficial or less beneficial. If you're only looking within your city's boundaries, very easy. State boundaries, national boundaries, a little bit easier. But in a global economy, we also need to look at where a lot of these materials come from, how they're mined, how they're processed, and how the people are being compensated or not compensated, as the case may be, in some places across the world, to really determine, is it a socially beneficial policy or not.
And Stan, I think you're about to call on me, so I'll just add to what Representative Szoka just said. Because at first I was thinking, with COVID, things seem a little more tangible on the health side, right? So I feel like, people have started to really focus more on the health impacts of things that are nearby and polluting in their local areas. So, obviously highways and roads that cut through neighborhoods and have plenty of heavy duty trucks that go through. But then also quality of life in terms of being able to go outside and see trees and be in an area that has like transit-oriented development. And so I feel like there, while maybe at some point, before this, things felt a little less tangible, that now it feels a little bit more tangible because people are much more keyed into the health impacts of their surroundings. And of course, you can't see the pollution that is harming yourself and your families. But at the same time, in North Carolina now has signed the medium and heavy duty truck MOU, and thinking through some of these, pollutants, not just for greenhouse gas emissions, which are, the largest greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation nationwide, but also sort of those more local air quality pollutants that are coming from the heavy duty vehicles that are going through neighborhoods just on the highway. So electrifying these types of vehicles has it almost like doubles your impact. And I think that people will see that impact even more as they, we start recovering from COVID and people being more vulnerable in that way as well.
I can take it a totally different way too, Stan. I mean, I'm the practical guy here. I don't know much about the policy side of it, but just from my business. So I'm proud of the company I work for. I mean, we build a safe product. We get kids to and from school every day. But all my career, I've heard, why do I need to spend that much on something that works 6 hours a day at most? And it's a challenge for us, right? So now suddenly you've got a vehicle that in the summertime can put energy back into the grid and become a utility for in both senses of the word, and then can do things like, when its life is through, store energy that's happening when you don't need it. When you're generating solar energy during the day when you really don't need that, but you can store it in batteries. And then other practical things like ride in an electric vehicle, and it's quiet, right? So now a school bus driver who had to talk over the diesel engine to quiet the kids now doesn't have to do that. And I think that, in a lot of ways on internal combustion engines, we've taken it about as far as it can go. And now with this new technology, it just allows for a lot of things that you didn't ever think could happen on the product side and the personal side. And so there's just a lot of ways that I think a lot of intangibles out there that I don't even know if we thought of yet. That just having an integrated, that can be tuned. I mean, here's another one. In my company, we go through an emissions change every 3 or 4 years for diesel engines, which requires a team of engineers to do something that the end customer doesn't so much care about, because it doesn't affect their driving or their riding experience. It's not going to happen again. Once we have EVs out there, there's zero emissions. You don't have to do that work again, and we can improve the product in other ways. So I think there's just tons of dead practical things that maybe we don't even know yet that people are going to feel an impact for. Maybe not in their pocketbooks, maybe not, in direct experiences, but just in quality of life, kind of like what Uchenna was saying. It's a very exciting time.
And I would add one more thing to that, Stan, and Jed, you just reminded me of this. So many people forget that electric vehicles on the personal vehicle side are less costs to maintain, less moving parts, and that I mean, it's not like immediate you see that on your pocketbook, but it's certainly something that you don't have to have an oil change. There are multiple things that happen where you're not having to spend regularly on maintaining your car. And that can be attractive to people. And I don't know that they really think about that as much, just because it's a more of a long-term, maybe intangible thing, but it becomes very tangible when you're not paying that money out of your pocket to have those services that you need for an internal combustion engine. Yeah,
and Sana, I'll jump in quickly. I think both of those, everything that was just talked about there is, it's great to hear. And I think ultimately, if a transit fleet or a large fleet can divert that budget that they would assign to vehicle maintenance, and then you use it in other areas, so such as like putting on additional services for communities, or whether even at the state level, where if you're improving public health by having cleaner and quieter vehicles, then again, there's additional budget there that can be utilized for other social programs. I think policy is a great piece here. I think ultimately there needs to be a level of stewardship from manufacturers and from companies in the region as well. So as a rival, this is what drove the MOU that we created with Charlotte. And although it is with the city, the idea is that this will benefit the entire region. And so we take more of a life cycle assessment approach. So instead of just focusing at the tailpipe and reducing diesel emissions with an electric vehicle, it's all about all of those pieces of the value chain, as Representative Szoka mentioned. And so, and then also how we manufacture these vehicles. And so our microfactory vehicles, it's manufacturing, but we don't have things like a paint shop. So we developed our composite materials that get used on the exterior of the vehicle to come out of the mold in a finished condition, so that we don't need to have a large polluting facility. So it's, again, there are areas that manufacturers and companies need to think about throughout their entire process, not just switching from diesel to electric.
I think those are all really great points, and to kind of bring us sort of in some way kind of back to utilities for a moment. I recognize that we've been talking about money that could be saved, right? And so if you're a school district buying a school bus, or if you're a city or a corporation electrifying your fleet, or if you're an individual EV owner like myself who saves about $1,000 a year driving an EV instead of a car, right? There's money that I'm now saving as a resident of North Carolina. And then on the other side of the ledger, we have these questions about potential incentives to drive the market, whether that's utilities engaging, which to Representative Szoka's point means when they're rate basing it, we're all paying a part of that, or it's about ways in which the state might lean in and direct funding or help incentivize things through tax code. And what I wonder is, like, when we look at this complexity of this new kind of transportation economic ecosystem, where you might be spending a little money here, but you're saving a lot of money over here, how do we begin to calculate and understand that in a way that can help drive policy? Because we recognize that there's actually an economic gain at the end that we might not be recognizing currently. And particularly, I'm curious about what folks think in terms of the role of utilities in that and how that can support, you know, the market here in North Carolina. Go ahead, Jed.
Well, I don't know if I've got any great answers for it. It is the question for us, because for us, it changes the whole model. But if you think this is using round numbers, if you had a bus that cost $200,000 in EV and it was $100,000 on diesel, and those are not correct numbers on purpose. Yeah, even if you could prove it saved $120,000 down the road, and this is a win, you still got to come up with the money up front. So it's and that's not, you know, it just breaks the model for people. It breaks their one time, you know, whether they're a contractor who's going out and has a line of credit for X dollars, or whether it's a school district that has to figure out how they pull dollars forward from their maintenance budget. It does break the model. So we've had creative things with utilities in a couple of different ways. We've had some folks, you know, we just did the Dominion model in Virginia, where they bought 50 EVs last year, and they're paying the EV upgrade portion of the vehicle, while the school district pays the diesel portion in return for them getting the batteries back at the end and any V2G revenue. So they've done the math on that. I think some of it was kind of public good kind of things, and they'll profit from the next round. But there's creativity out there to be done, whether it comes from the regulated side or the non-regulated side, and I'll let you guys fight that fight of whether that should be or not. But that there are partnerships to develop out there, and there's just I think a lot of creativity to come.
Can I hop in here? Look, you have asked the multi-trillion-dollar question to which nobody really knows the answer. And let me give you an example of that. House Bill 589 passed in the 2017 session, Competitive Energy Solutions for North Carolina. Again, myself and Representative Dean Art from Union County passed that, which is trying to pull our state energy policy in terms of renewable energy and its integration into the grid into this century, not even into this decade, but into this century. We did that. And I remember distinctly that we talked just a little bit about battery storage, you know, industrial sized battery storage. And all the projections in 2017 were that utility size storage batteries that utilities could use, you know, would not be economical until 2030. Well, guess what? They were economical just 2 short years later, like 2 years ago, the end of 2019. So what the challenge here is that technology is racing ahead so fast that policy doesn't react that quickly. I mean, in North Carolina legislature, I mean, I'm sitting in my office at my regular job, working on a holiday to try and catch up, because it's a part-time gig, you know? I mean, that's what being a legislator is. But so we go in every 2 years, you might pass a law, and now technology is raced past it, so you have to come back and look for another law, which pushes me even further into not trying to legislate solutions as they think we need to legislate them today, but to leave things a little bit more open so that as technology races ahead, we don't have to pass a new law, which really favors free markets, and markets allocate resources best. I mean, government just does a lousy job at it. No matter how good the government is or the officials are, they do a lousy job at it. So it's this whole policy issue. It's like, what should the policy be for EVs? Should we, for example, give rebates, you know, to encourage people to buy more? Personally, I don't think that's a great idea. Some people might. You know, so the whole regulated utility model that we are currently operating under, and I suspect we'll be under this model for next 10, 15, 20, 30 years. I'm not sure. It's difficult to find the right policy that doesn't penalize ratepayers in an unfair way for going to all electric vehicles, because if you, particularly people down at the lower end of the economic scale, they can't afford EVs, even used ones. So if you make their electric rates go up, then you're putting them even in a worse position than they are to begin with. Or somebody, a retired person on a fixed income, doesn't drive that much, they're not going to buy an EV, and then you're making their electric rates go up. I mean, I don't have the answer, and it is the multi-trillion-dollar question. I would just tell you that it is complex, and I absolutely encourage anybody who's got some great ideas on how to cut the baby in half on this one, get hold of my office and let me know.
Well, building off of that and kind of sort of circling us around to wrap up here, Susan, you mentioned, when you were speaking about how important it is for companies looking to relocate or expand here, kind of what that policy environment is. And North Carolina was very successful at building the solar clean energy economy here in North Carolina. And I'm curious what lessons we might have, be them policy, be them regulated utility lessons in that solar space that might be applicable to electric transportation that would allow us to sort of avoid making some of the same mistakes again and running a little faster and more efficiently with this sector.
Well, I don't know that I could necessarily speak to what policy, but I mean, what I could say is that businesses that are looking at the state are like Richard's business and Jed's business. They are proud of their corporate culture, and they have built a culture around sustainability writ large. And so they are looking for a place where that kind of philosophy is embraced. And so whether it's solar or whether it's EV or whatever it is, the state is more competitive if we're able to tell a story around that. And so our job is to tell that story no matter what it is. And so, but I think we have a good one to tell here. But I think that's important, not just to EV companies, but it's important to life sciences companies and information technology companies and anybody who has a brand or a product, whether that's a widget or final product that has a culture around wanting, understanding the importance of these types of issues. But I couldn't be much more specific than that.
No, I appreciate it. I think the stories need to be compelling, and I think that we certainly as a state have done a lot of good work to set a strong foundation as a clean energy economy hub here, and everybody on this call, including everybody who's here in the audience, is working on that, and it's a really exciting time. And so I just want to kind of use that as a segue to wrap us up here today as we come up on the end of time. And first and foremost, I just want to thank Representative Szoka, Susan, Uchenna, Richard, Jed, and Nick so much for your time today, for this lively conversation. Nick, for your presentation. Greatly appreciated, and really appreciate the work that all of you are doing to try to move this market and these opportunities forward. As Nick had mentioned at the top of the presentation, Atlas Public Policy and SACE will be publishing a North Carolina Transportation Electrification brief that we expect to be out this week that goes deep into the data that Nick was sharing with us. So we'll make sure to spread that far and wide because it helps tell a compelling story for the opportunity here in North Carolina. As does another report that SACE and other advocates have been supporting, that Plug-in North Carolina is soon to publish. North Carolina State of the State report. It's going to be the first of its kind to look at all the things that are happening in North Carolina around electric transportation. And the report's going to summarize feedback from many of the organizations represented on this webinar to gauge the many successes that we saw in 2020 despite the pandemic, and outline the many opportunities to further solidify North Carolina as a national leader in transportation electrification. So both those resources will be coming out here shortly, and I think will help with that storytelling. I also want to thank all of my colleagues at SACE, the team behind the scenes, especially Dory, who's been watching the chat for questions, and Kyle, who has orchestrated the webinar today. And thank you to all the attendees who took time out to be with us today. So on that, I want to wish everyone a great weekend. And until next time, so long.